Welcome back to Now Let's Be Honest. I'm David Tate,
And I'm Brienne.
and today we are going to be continuing in our series going through the Song of Solomon. And so far, we've covered multiple different sections in Song of Solomon. We are starting the third chapter today, and basically, if you haven't seen the other stuff, we have basically been tracking the story of this young couple as their relationship is blossoming. And we have talked about the initial elements of attraction, and we've even talked about what seemed to be ancient equivalents of dating and courtship over the course of the previous weeks. And we've drawn out different principles that we could learn from both of those and from all of those about like what type of person you should be looking for and what type of person you should be trying to pursue whenever it comes to pursuing a romantic relationship. And we've talked about principles of how to govern these things and how to engage in these things in a wise, godly manner. And where we left off this couple at the end of chapter 2 is that it seems like, as best we can discern the narrative flow of this poem, because obviously it's a poem, it's a bit difficult to understand, but as best we can discern the storyline of this poem, the man proposed to the girl, and there was this little setback where she kind of was hesitant to say yes, not because of anything he had done, but just because of some of her own things going on. But eventually she said yes, and where we ended with chapter 2 was her saying, "Get out of here." And she was not saying that in a negative way. She was saying it in a sense of like, hey, go get a place prepared for us so that you can get back here as quickly as possible in order for us to get married. And so that is where we're going to be picking up in chapter 3. And I'm just going to start us off by just reading the first 4 verses here. And then I'm going to hand it over to Brienne. And actually, you know what? I won't even read the first 4 verses. I'm just going to start with the first 2 verses.
Okay, I was gonna say, this is a big chunk.
Yeah, mainly because I don't want you to have to explain the whole way through. I'll read the first 2 verses, and then I'll hand it over to Brienne for her to begin explaining it a little bit. All right. On my bed, night after night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. I must arise now and go about the city. In the streets and in the squares, I must seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. All right, Brienne, what's this about?
Yeah. So we talked about how this part is probably her laying at bed at night. And it could be possibly like a dream or a nightmare, or it could be her kind of like whenever you stay up late at night, something that everyone else probably does. You stay up late at night kind of just like thinking about things. It could be that, because it says on my bed at night. And it seems like she's just really longing for her beloved. He's been gone preparing this place, and she really wants him to come back. She misses him. She wants to be with him. And so it's kind of her showing her emotion behind that, saying that she really wants him to come back. She's longing for him, but she can't find him because he's off away preparing a place for the both of them.
Yeah, and so this is one of those places where I think that just in general in the song, depending on who you're reading and what commentators you read, some people will try to suggest that there is not a narrative flow to the song and that it's really just a bunch of disjointed songs that don't have any relationship to one another. But I think that that's really hard to defend whenever you actually are just following what the songs are communicating, right? Because literally the last song was this guy saying, "Arise, my beloved, let's go do something." And it seems like he is suggesting, let's get married. And then finally she says, go away and basically like just go get it done. Right? And if you know anything about the betrothal customs of that time period, the man would go away and prepare a place. And so now we have this situation set up where they are separated from one another and they're in this period of waiting, right? And so that's exactly what you see with the girl, right? On my bed night after night I saw him, right? This isn't just one night, night after night. It's a repetitive thing. So this is either a recurring nightmare, it is her laying in her bed and she's just thinking about it again and again, kind of like Brienne. This is the things that we all do, but the specific thing that it focuses on is her seeking her beloved. And you see this at the end of verse 1 and at the end of verse 2. There's this phrase that's repeated: I sought him, but did not find him. I sought him, but did not find him. Right? And so she's looking for him, but she doesn't know where he's at. And so it kind of breaks it down. I must arise now and go about the city. In the streets and the squares, I must seek him whom my soul loves. So the idea is most likely not that she is literally getting up out of bed and going and doing this.
Right.
It's that this is what she is seeing in her dream. Or maybe when she's just laying in bed at night, if she's awake, this is what she's wanting to go do, right? She's wanting to get up and she's wanting to go look for him, because it seems like what this is implying is that he's been gone longer than expected, right? And ultimately, what I'm excited about is that this is setting up one of the most dramatic moments in the entire song and one of my favorite moments in the entire song, because there's going to be this really great plot twist, which I think makes the song so much more beautiful and draws a lot of parallels to our relationship with Christ as well. But the main thing I want to highlight here is that she finds herself in this position of waiting, right? And if we're trying to draw principles out of this, basically we don't have betrothal nowadays, but the equivalent would be engagement, right? So during this time period of engagement, you find you find modern day couples in this weird place where they are awaiting their wedding day, but they are not yet able to fully engage in the benefits of marriage, and instead the temptations might be growing even stronger and stronger as they await that wedding day. And I think we're going to see this girl go through those same growing temptations and those same growing desires as she's in that state of waiting. And so we're going to have to see how she responds to those in order for us to draw principles out of it. But for right now, we just see that night after night she's waiting, but she can't find him. So it seems like he's staying away longer than anticipated. And so in her dream or in her daydreams, she's going and seeking him, but she can't find him. And then that leads us to verse 3, where it says, the watchmen who go about the city found me. And I said, have you seen him whom my soul loves? So what's going on there?
Yeah, so it seems like in her dream, or when she's thinking, she's going around asking all these people, anyone she sees on the streets. And she finally resorts to seeing the watchmen, which would be people that are like near the gate, but they're high up. So that way they can see like far out across the land. So if they saw like if enemies were coming to attack their city, they'd be able to say like, oh hey, like war's about to happen. And so she's like, okay, no one else has seen him, maybe I can ask the watchmen because they're high up there, maybe they can see if he's coming or if they've seen him lately. And so she goes and asks, have you seen the one whom I've loved? No one else has seen him, but you're high up, maybe you can see like way out there, do you see him? And so she's still longing for him, still searching for him.
Yeah, so you just get to see the desperation that she's gotten to. I mean, if you're having to go ask a watchman where your guy's at, this is problematic. But I think you also get to see these elements of doubt within here as well, because obviously she is in this state of waiting where she is waiting for her wedding day. And if you know anything about these customs, it would have been a huge party whenever this guy comes back. I mean, you even see this in the parable that Jesus shares about the bridegroom returning and like the 10 virgins, right? Like it's a whole party where it's a whole procession where the man comes to retrieve his bride and go have this wedding. And for some reason, she's thinking that she might have missed it almost, right? Like, so you see that this is why I lean towards the idea that this is a dream, right? Because it doesn't seem like this is really grounded in any level of reality. This is more her own anxieties being given visuals, right? So she is seeing herself wandering throughout the streets looking for him and even going up to the watchman being like, hey, have you seen him? Whereas obviously if her man was back, she would be the first one to know, right? He would be coming to return to her. But it's almost like her greatest anxieties deep down are bubbling to the surface. We've seen throughout the past chapters that this is a girl who has some insecurities. She doesn't necessarily think that she is worthy of the guy that she's with. And to be fair, she might not be, right? Because he has proven himself to be pretty much the perfect individual throughout all of this. And once again, the song is mainly from her perspective. And so it's really flattering that she sees him that way. But she doesn't necessarily view herself as worthy. And she has a lot of insecurities that she's dealing with. And so you could see these things coming to the surface in this dream where she's thinking, where's he at? Why is he taking so long? Is he even coming back at all? To where she's going throughout the street. She's asking everybody. She goes up to the watchman. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? But then she's going to find him. Scarcely had I passed them by when I found him whom my soul loves. I seized him and would not let him go until I had brought him to my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me. All right, so before we explain that entire verse, let's actually start with the last part there and just break down the whole mother's house thing, because that might be the thing that kind of confuses people because it seems kind of strange. What's going on with the mother's house?
So usually whenever it comes to stuff like this, it would usually say something like father's house, because a lot of times, you know, when it comes to like the daughter, the father's the one who kind of makes the decisions and stuff like that. And so
she would be living at his house.
She
she is a young girl.
Yeah.
Who, you know, she's a young unmarried girl, therefore she would be living at her father's house.
Right.
But why does it say mother?
Yeah, so this probably tells us that the father isn't in the picture. He probably is passed away or something like that. And so the person that she's living with is her mother. And so therefore it's her mother's house.
Yeah, and this isn't the first place where we've gotten like that suggestion, right? If you go back to chapter 1, when she
With the
talks about why her
vineyards.
skin was burned and why it was tan, it's because she said that her mother's sons
Hmm.
forced her to work the vineyards,
Yeah.
right? So she didn't say my brothers, she said my mother's sons,
Yeah.
which could be stepbrothers. We don't know. That's why I've said she's kind of like a Cinderella figure.
Hmm.
She's got wicked stepbrothers instead of wicked stepsisters. But she always references her mother, and she never mentions a father figure in the picture.
Yeah.
And so maybe the father just wasn't there at all. Maybe he had passed away. We don't fully know.
Hmm.
But the idea is not like the focus isn't on her mother. The focus is on her place of dwelling. That's the main
Yeah.
reason I wanted to paint.
Yeah.
I wanted to draw focus to that, right?
Mhm.
She's not just being like, man, I just really want to bring him to my mom's house. Well, no, that is where she is living right now.
Right. Yeah.
So why is that? So actually, you know what? Before I even ask that, maybe you can walk us through the verse itself. What's going on in the verse?
You're talking about the part.
The,
with
the whole verse
guardian
4.
letters?
Whole verse 4.
Oh, her.
Yeah,
Verse 4.
like
Okay.
when, like so she passes the watchman.
Yeah.
She asks them
finds
where are they.
them.
Yes.
She's excited and she's like, "Hey, you've been gone for forever. I've been longing for you. I've been missing you. I'm not letting you go. Like, you're not gonna leave my side again. I've missed you too much." And so she's like, "No, you need to come with me." And obviously, if he's coming back from preparing a house, that means that he's prepared a house somewhere else for them, right? And so he's coming back to her. And now she's saying, "Hey, we should go to my mother's house," which means that would be closer in proximity than going all the way to wherever the house is that he's prepared for them. Basically saying that she's like really excited to see him, and those emotions that we've seen before that have cropped up whenever she's talking to the daughters of Jerusalem, those are cropping up again because she's longed for him for so long. He's finally here right in front of her, and she's like, "Man, I like really desire you and I really want you. Let's like go to my mother's house." And it says, "Into the chambers of her who conceived me." So it's kind of giving imagery of them wanting to like consummate their marriage. But if they were to do that, they wouldn't be married yet, which kind of leads into verse 5 as to what's kind of going to happen there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so the idea is that she's restless, right? She's
Yeah.
restless. She doesn't want to wait any longer. And in this dream, she's basically just having this dream where she is getting to the verge of wanting to satisfy her longings for her man
Mhm.
with him, which is going to, like Brienne said, lead
Mhm.
into verse 5 right here,
Right.
right? So she's going around the city. She's asking everybody, where's my beloved? Where's my beloved? Where's my beloved?
Mhm.
And then scarcely had she passed them by, then she finds him, right? Which once again suggests this is probably a dream, right? Because if this were real
Yeah.
life, this would be really strange,
Yeah.
right? But she's wandering around, and we don't even get to see what the watchman responded, but she
Right.
passes by them. We don't know where she's at, but she finds him, and when she finds him, she seizes him and will not let him go,
Mhm.
right? The idea, like Brienne pointed out, is kind of like, man, I have been away from you for so long, I'm not letting you go again, right? Like being away from you was miserable. You're not getting out of my sights again. And the imagery that this brings to mind for me is the image of Jesus whenever he walks out of the tomb, right? Whenever, well, not when he walks out of the tomb, but whenever he shows up to Mary Magdalene,
Yeah.
right? And Mary Magdalene thinks that he's the gardener. And then whenever he reveals himself to be the resurrected Jesus, she cries out, "Rabboni," and she hugs him. And he says to not cling to him,
Mhm.
right? And what he's saying is not, oh, don't hug me, don't touch me. He's saying, don't cling to me in the sense of, don't get used to me being around,
Mhm.
right? So Jesus is actually making a point that this woman would not like her man to say to her,
Yeah.
right? Because Jesus is telling Mary Magdalene, yes, I'm back, but I'm not staying for long, right? Because
Mhm.
technically the betrothal period is still in practice,
Right.
right? And so Jesus was actually going to leave for a lot longer.
Mhm.
And one day in the future, when he comes back, we are going to get to cling to him and never let go.
Yeah.
But for Mary Magdalene in that situation, she was going to have to let go,
Yeah.
right? And so it's kind of the same imagery here, except the
Mhm.
woman's saying, I seize him and would not let him go, right? I'm not
Yeah.
letting you go anywhere until I had brought him to my mother's house and into
Mhm.
the chamber of her who conceived me. The idea is she's like, I don't even want to wait until he brings me to the place that he prepared.
Right.
My mom has a place right over here. This is where I've been living. That place is closer.
Mhm.
We can go consummate this thing right here, right now, if we want, right?
Mhm.
I want to take him to my home. I want to take him into the chamber of her who conceived me, right? I want to take him to bed,
Mhm.
right? And I don't want you to think of this as this girl who is just having these endless sexual fantasies, who is just sexually crazy and just like obsessed with sex. That's not how we're supposed to view this girl.
Mhm.
Instead, I think that through how Song of Solomon is portraying sexuality, it's that she's not obsessed with the physical action of sex itself, but what sex represents.
Right.
It's the idea of giving yourself to the other person. That's what
Mhm.
we've seen throughout the song. Every time her sexual desires have increased, it has been a result of the peace and security that she finds in the man, right? So back in chapter 2, she says that he was like the apple tree in the midst of the forest, and she delighted to sit in his shade. And as a result of that, her desires for him began to grow. So it
Mhm.
wasn't just, ooh, I just really want to experience these things. That's kind of how our culture treats it nowadays.
Yeah.
Instead, she's like, no, this is a man I can trust, and
Mhm.
I want to express that trust in the greatest way possible. I want to give him what I'm going to give nobody else,
Mhm.
right? And so this is the thing that's ultimately pushing them towards marriage. And so what we see is that that desire is growing, but like Brienne pointed out,
Mhm.
in this dream, they're not married yet.
Right.
And so she's still in this period of waiting,
Mhm.
and that longing is really growing, and she really wants to just take him to bed right here, right now.
Mhm.
But they're not married yet. And so it's like she wakes up from the dream, and just like in chapter 2, whenever those desires were building up, and she was telling, like, she was like telling the
Her
girls,
friends.
sustain me with raisin cakes, for I'm sick with love. Let his left hand be under my head, and his right hand embrace me. Right whenever she was saying that, and right here, she responds in the exact same way. Every time she feels these desires building up, she gets to this phrase. Verse 5. I call you to solemnly swear, O daughters of Jerusalem,
Mhm.
by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases.
Mhm.
So this is a phrase right here that if you want to know more about what this phrase is talking about, just go back to our video on principles of dating, because we saw the same exact phrase there. But maybe, Brienne, I can hand this over to you.
Mhm.
What are some principles we might learn about how she handles this situation,
Mhm.
given where they're at in their relationship,
Mhm.
on the verge of their wedding night, but not quite
Mhm.
there yet, where she's still in this period of waiting?
Mhm.
What can we learn about how she handles this?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing we kind of see that in other parts too, but it kind of shows that desires, the desires that she's feeling are not inherently a bad thing. But like David was saying, it's something that should propel you forward towards marriage, but it's what you do with those desires that make the difference. If you have those desires, that's not bad, but you're not supposed to act upon them. And
Yet.
so yet,
Yeah.
yeah. So they're not married yet, so she shouldn't act upon those desires yet. So she kind of has to rein herself back in and realize, okay, now's not the time, but marriage is coming, and then that's when I can fully be able to give myself to him. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just get to see principles of like self-control,
Yeah.
right? That's really something that they do very well. And one thing that's just worth highlighting is that there's no place in the song where the girl voices that she feels guilty over these desires. And I don't think that God wants her to feel guilty over the desires themselves, because she's not acting upon them yet, right? So the desires themselves are a good and beautiful thing. You should have these desires because it's supposed to propel you towards marriage, right? So sexual desires are not inherently bad. The main reason I emphasize this a lot is because I think that a lot of times the message that people receive in churches is that sexual desire is bad, and therefore if they just have this desire, they feel guilty. And I've heard horror stories of people who have saved themselves for marriage, and whenever they finally gave themselves to their spouse on their wedding night, they felt guilty about it because subconsciously they had developed this mentality that sex was a bad thing. Sex is not a bad thing. God created it. God designed it. He wanted it to be enjoyable for the people partaking in it, but in its appropriate context, right? Kind of like a good meal, right? You know what? God wants you to enjoy food, but he doesn't want you to be gluttonous, right? It's all about eating things at the appropriate time and enjoying things and satisfying those appetites when God designed them to be enjoyed, right? So this girl, she is not feeling guilty about these desires, and the text doesn't want you to think that she should feel guilty. Instead, the Bible is just portraying an honest relationship, and the girl is expressing her desires, and she feels them building up, and she is being totally honest. She says, you know what? Right now, there is nothing more than I want than to just grab my guy, take him to my mama's house, and go give myself to him. She says, that's what I want to do. But then she immediately follows that up by turning to her friends and saying, don't awaken love before it pleases, right? Because now is not the appropriate time. They're not yet married. And so even though she wants to do that more than anything, she's not going to do it. So yes, the desires are there, but she denies herself and she chooses to honor what God wants instead, right? And they can communicate all this without even mentioning the name of God, right? But I did mention this back in our video on the dating thing. The phrase by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field in Hebrew sounds very, very similar to swearing in the name of God,
Mm.
right? Like just like if you were to just literally read it in Hebrew,
Mhm.
it's almost like a pun, right? To
Oh,
where
okay.
it sounds very similar to saying in the name of God,
Mhm.
which is very cool. All right, but let's move on beyond that because now I want to get to one of my favorite
Exciting
parts of the
part.
entire
Mm.
song.
Mhm.
Okay, so I don't have it all in one slide because I want to allow the anticipation to build. But
You get a hint here.
between verses 5 and 6, it seems like there might be a little gap in time, and I don't know how much gap. But you have to remember that verses 1 through 5 were in the context of a night after night thing,
Yeah.
right? She was dreaming night after night after night. This was her period of waiting. She was
Mhm.
constantly yearning, constantly wanting her man to return, and then now it seems like, and you'll pick up on how we arrived at this conclusion in these
Mhm.
verses, it seems like she is out with her friends working the vineyards like she normally does.
Yep.
And this is what we read. Who is this coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, as rising incense of myrrh and frankincense with all scented powders of the merchant? All right, so set the scene for
Mhm.
us. What's going on here?
Yeah, so they're working in the wilderness. They're working in the vineyards, and from the wilderness, they see this smoke that's coming up, and they start to smell these different smells, but they're not really seeing anything. They're not seeing people yet, and they're like, Do y'all smell that? Do y'all see that smoke? Like, what is going on? Like, who is possibly coming this way?" And we know that like incense of myrrh and frankincense, that's something that's like a, how would you say, like a more, not like wealthy thing, but like something that's not like a everyday, like something for special occasions.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
it's something that's for special occasions. And so they're like, what is going on? Like this seems very extravagant, and they're trying to figure out kind of like what's happening.
Yeah. And so most of the song seems to have been set in the north region just because a lot of
Mhm.
the imagery, it's appealing to stuff that's in like the northern region of Israel, like in the Galilean area. Whereas now she says that whatever this is coming from the wilderness, right? So
Mhm.
it's coming from the south, the Judean desert area,
Mhm.
right? It's coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke as rising incense and frankincense with all the scented powders of the merchant, right? The idea is you can just imagine them. They might not be working the vineyards. I have no idea. That's just how I like to picture it.
Yeah.
They're outside, right?
Yeah.
Her and her friends, they're outside, and all of a sudden you can almost imagine they smell something before they see it.
Mhm.
They smell the frankincense, they smell the myrrh. They look in the distance, and there's smoke coming over the hills.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden everybody's beginning to talk. Who is that?
Yeah.
Who's like this seems to be a big deal. Whatever it is, this isn't normally what we see in this town. Remember, they're
Mhm.
just in like this backwoods rinky-dink
Right.
town.
Yeah.
She's just a poor girl from a poor family. But whatever's coming up over the hills is a big deal. And she says, "Behold, it is the traveling couch of Solomon. 60 mighty men around it, of the mighty men of Israel. All of them are those who seize the sword, learned in war. Each man has his sword at his side, guarding against the dreadful things of the night. King Solomon has made for himself a sedan chair from the timber of Lebanon."
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we get to see who it is,
Yeah.
but what's going on here?
Yeah. So they see the smoke, they smell the frankincense and the myrrh, and then they look and they're like, "Is that Solomon coming over the hills? Like,
Yeah.
why would Solomon be in our town? Like, what could he possibly need from us?" And then they see all these men, and it says that they have 60 men, and it says the mighty men, which is we talked about it being like the Gibborim,
Mhm.
like the people, David's mighty men, the same idea as that. And so there's these highly trained men that are like completely surrounding. So you're like, okay, Solomon's here, and obviously like he's here for something important if he comes with like all the smoke and the frankincense and the myrrh, and there's 60 men with swords who are like highly trained people are coming with him. They're like, okay, Solomon's here, but he's also here for something really important. And so it kind of gives this lingering anticipation of like, what could Solomon possibly be here for in our tiny little town?
Well, yeah, there's some mystery to this because it's like, okay, they're just some rinky-dink town in Galilee,
Mhm.
and I guess maybe they're probably, I mean, if I'm just trying to step in their minds,
Mhm.
they're probably thinking, I don't know, maybe he's here for some wine or something.
Yeah.
But Solomon never visits them,
Yeah.
right? And they can just tell from a distance that this is a big deal. There's smoke coming over here. They can smell the perfumes. And then they see that it's Solomon on his traveling couch, but keep in mind that it's at a distance still,
Yeah.
right? So we just see them from a distance, but they can just tell by everything surrounding it. It's got to
Like
be
this-
Solomon. It
yeah.
can't be anybody else, right? It's the king of all Israel.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, they probably didn't know what Solomon looked like. It's not
Right.
like they had news channels back then where everybody just knew what everybody looked like.
Mhm.
No, they just don't know who Solomon is. Behold, it's the traveling couch of Solomon. Okay, so it's apparently Solomon, and he's traveling with a whole caravan of people,
Mhm.
and he's surrounded by 60 mighty men of the mighty men of Israel. These are the elite of the elite,
Best of the
soldiers, the best of the best of all of the people of Israel.
Yeah.
And all of them are those who seize the sword, learned in war. Each man has his sword at its side, guarding against the dreadful things of the night. The
Mhm.
idea is that these guys who are surrounding Solomon, they are protectors and soldiers and guardians.
Yeah.
And whatever Solomon's here for, it almost seems like he's going to war.
He's on a mission.
Yeah, he's on
whatever
some
it
sort of
is.
mission, right?
Yeah.
That's what's being communicated. Whatever Solomon's here for, it isn't just a little vacation, right? These guys are surrounding him, and it seems like for some reason Solomon needs the utmost protection.
Mm.
And so this is very weird because you're like, what the heck is going on? And you can
Yeah.
just imagine all the people of the town gathering together as they're trying to figure out why the heck is the king in our village?
Mm-hmm.
And then it says King Solomon has made for himself a sedan chair from the timber of Lebanon. The idea is that the caravan is getting closer, right? And as it's getting closer, they're able to pick up more and more of the details, right? So he made this beautiful chair made out of the finest timber,
Best of the best.
right? The best of the best. And now you're just really wondering, like, there's just so much
Yeah.
intrigue behind this, and you're wondering what the heck
Yeah.
could possibly be going on here. And it seems totally random in light of the song that preceded it, right? We've been reading this love song about this poor little vineyard girl and this shepherd boy that she loves.
Mm.
And now here she is just waiting for him to return, and then there's this whole side story
Yeah.
about Solomon showing up.
I'm like, well,
And it seems really random, but then we're going to get to the big plot twist. You ready for this? He made its posts of silver, its back of gold, and its seat of purple fabric, with its interior inlaid with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth and see, O daughters of Zion, King Solomon with the crown, with which his mother has crowned him. You ready for this? On the day of his wedding, and on the day of his gladness of heart.
Mhm.
Now, this is the point where I would typically turn to Brienne and say, Brienne, would you like to explain it? But I've got to spoil it first.
Okay.
This is the biggest and best plot twist of the entire song, which makes the song so amazing.
Mhm.
It turns out that the shepherd boy that she had fallen in love with was actually King Solomon all along. Right? She hadn't fallen in love with him thinking that he was nothing.
Yeah.
Right? She had fallen in love with him just because of who he was. And then when he returns, it turns out that he was something way better
Mhm.
than she could have ever expected.
Yeah.
But walk us through it.
Uh-huh.
Walk it through us. Starting in verse 10, just walk us through this passage.
Yeah, so we see he's getting closer and closer, and so they're starting to pick out more of those details. It's made with post of silver. Well, that's expensive, and like you put some good money into that. It's back of gold. Oh my gosh, like that's even more expensive. And it's seat of purple fabric, and we know that purple is kind of a sign for like royalty,
Yeah.
and for wealth. And so we have silver, we have gold, we have purple, and I love this part. With its interior inlaid with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. And that's like your first hint. You're like, her friends had something to do with this.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because you're reading this and it starts off with just a cloud in the distance.
Yeah.
And then as the people come over, they can see there's a chair. It's like the traveling couch of Solomon.
Yeah.
And then you see this army all around.
Mhm.
And as they get closer, you see more and more details
Yeah.
until eventually you see the outside structure. It's silver. You see the back is of gold. And the idea is the girl speaking all of this, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And her eyes are just taking it all in. And she's looking. And then all of a sudden she looks at the fabric. And it's almost like she just knows the weave of the fabric.
Yeah.
She's like, that looks familiar.
Yeah.
Wait a second. That looks like my girlfriends did that.
Yeah.
And then she's going to lay her eyes on the guy.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, she's probably never seen Solomon. She's had
Mhm.
no excuse to ever be around Solomon, right?
Right.
She's just some poor girl. She does not know what Solomon looks like.
Yeah.
And she's going to see the guy with a crown on his head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be the same guy that she fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
All right, sorry. Continue walking through it.
Yeah. And so, and I also like that this part just because we've talked about so much of like community being like such an important part. And this is just like a really cool moment where I feel like they all collide. Like he's coming back for her. They've been betrothed. She's been missing him. And then you see how like her friends, her community are also involved in that also. And it's all like interweaved. And I just love that part. But anyways, we go to verse 11. Go forth and see, O daughters of Zion. They're like, she's like, go look over there. Am I seeing like who that is? King Solomon with the crown? Like, is that King Solomon over there? With which his mother has crowned him on the day of his wedding. So like, that's not just like any crown. That's not just like his king crown that he wears all the time. Like that's just like a specific crown that his mom must have given him to like wear on his wedding, like something special to kind of commemorate that moment for him. And then it says on the day of his gladness of heart. I love that part too. That very last verse I think is just so sweet because I feel like it really encapsulates, I think, everything that like he's probably feeling too, that he's like the king of Israel and he has the whole land in front of him, but like getting married to this one girl is the
Yeah.
gladness of his heart. Like, I just love that.
Yeah. And
Sweet.
this is one of those places where, once again, you have to read it in context of the entire thing. And this is
Mhm.
where I think it's very difficult to say that these songs are just segmented apart.
Mm-hmm.
Because throughout this whole song, we have seen that the daughters of Jerusalem have been so supportive
Yeah.
of this girl and this guy in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that has been the thing. Like you pointed out, community has been central. And they're like, we're going to support you. We love
Yeah.
this relationship. We're going to support you as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets to that point where the traveling couch is getting closer, and she sees that the interior has been adorned by her best friends.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are some people who will suggest that maybe the shepherd boy and Solomon are two separate people.
Mm-hmm.
And they will say the shepherd boy is her true love and that Solomon really stole her away.
Yeah.
That's
is
not
connected.
consistent with the song.
Mm-hmm.
Because we see that the daughters of Jerusalem are the ones who prepared this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the daughters of Jerusalem have said that they are supporting her with the shepherd boy this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we really see here is that the daughters of Jerusalem had insight to who Solomon was before even she did, right? They had an understanding of who this guy was, and she wasn't even privy to that information.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually just one big surprise where you can almost imagine her little girlfriends getting together and be like, oh man, I
It's
can't wait till
coming.
she finds out.
Yeah.
And then that's why she invites them over. She says, hey, daughters of Jerusalem, come over here. What do you see in front of you? Were you aware of this? Go forth and see, O daughters of Zion, King Solomon with the crown. But it's not just any crown.
Yeah.
It's the crown his mother gave him. So we have that parallel between, in her dream, her talking about her mother's house, and now the crown that his mother gave him. This would be Bathsheba, right? Bathsheba's the one, the mother.
Mm-hmm.
She gave him this crown, and she gave it to him on the day of his wedding.
Mm-hmm.
That right there is the plot twist,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're like, this is like, you're basically with the girl processing
Right.
this big surprise.
Yeah.
And she's realizing that's not a normal crown. That's the crown that his mother gave him on the day of his wedding. If he's wearing it right now, that means that this is the day of his wedding. And the idea is that she's looking at the crown, and then her eyes fall
And
down on his face.
Yeah.
And she's like, this is the man, right? And once again, the context. We just saw her in the state of waiting, and she was longing for her man to return. And then all of a sudden, we immediately cut to smoke coming over the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wait, who is that? Oh, it's Solomon. Oh my gosh. Is Solomon the man that I fell in love with?
Yeah.
And that's the realization that he's
Yeah.
having right here. But then it doesn't end there. Like Brianne pointed out,
Mhm.
it doesn't just stop at the day of his wedding, because you know what? We know who Solomon is.
Yeah.
Going on, he's going to have a lot of weddings.
Yeah.
But this wedding in particular is the day of his gladness of heart. That's why his mother gave him a special crown, right? This wasn't just any wedding. This is the wedding.
Yeah.
I'd like to think this is his first marriage.
Yeah.
I hope. But this is just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stuff right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to talk, just this video might be a little bit longer because I do want to spend a few moments just talking about the parallels between our relationship, the relationship in the song and our relationship with Christ. I want to talk about that. But one thing I do want to highlight that we just kind of talked about when we were talking about principles of engagement and principles of marriage and stuff like that, is the idea of saving the best for last. And the main reason I highlighted that is because one thing that we see right here is that Solomon and the girl fell in love with each other, not because of what the one person had to offer the other person, but simply because of who they were, right? She did not fall in love with this man because she knew he was a king and he was a rich king and he was the wisest king in the world and the richest man in the world. That's not why. She fell in love with him because of who he was, right? And he saved the best for last. Right. And he fell in love with her, not because she had anything to give him, because she didn't, right? She doesn't have a plot twist moment.
Yeah.
She's just the girl that he chose. Right. And so they fell in love with each other simply because of how they loved one another.
Right.
Right.
Which, to tie back to like our other videos, it's things that they can control.
Yes.
They can control their character and stuff. But
Yeah. But ultimately, the reason I emphasize the whole saving the best for last thing is, first off, to call back to the imagery of Jesus at the wedding at Cana, whenever he made the wine, and they said usually they give out the best wine first, but you've saved the best for last. And I was wanting to take that principle and flip-flop how we typically treat dating, because a lot of the times whenever you see people dating one another, usually they'll put their best foot forward first, right? And usually during those early months and early even years of dating or something like that, or even the early years of marriage, people will put their best foot forward and they will try to make themselves look amazing. And it's only through getting to know them longer and longer that you begin to really see the chinks in the armor, and you begin to see like, oh, you were just showing me your best qualities. Whereas what we see with Solomon here is that he actually reserved a lot of things so that whenever he gave himself to his bride on their wedding day, he wasn't simply giving his body. He was actually revealing his full self. And I'm not saying that we should be deceptive and secretive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting that we shouldn't put the best foot forward first, and then once people are comfortable with us, then be like,
Right,
all right,
later
now
on.
I can be my true self.
Mhm.
No, the idea is that you should really just let them see you at your worst early on so that you can really just over impress them later on, right? Like, save the best for last, right? Don't give everything away immediately. There was another thing I was wanting to highlight here. I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, the other thing that I want to highlight just from when it comes to literal principles here is that we see a lot of buildup to the wedding ceremony right here. But what we're going to see is that there's never a moment where the Song of Solomon actually details the wedding ceremony itself. Right? We're going to go straight from the end of chapter 3 right here into chapter 4. And chapter 4 is going to be them in their house on their wedding night, and they're about to consummate their relationship. So we're not actually going to see the wedding ceremony, right? We see the buildup, and we see that it's a celebration, and I can guarantee you that the wedding ceremony itself was a celebration. But apparently the Song of Solomon doesn't feel a need to tell us about the ceremony.
Yeah.
Why? Because ultimately the ceremony itself isn't nearly as important as the relationship that it anticipates, right? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an awesome, super great wedding ceremony. I hope you do, because it should be a celebration. Does it need to be millions of dollars? I hope not. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it should be a celebration because you're celebrating this amazing relationship between man and woman. That's great, and it pictures our relationship with God. But ultimately, there are so many times that we see people who spend years preparing for a single ceremony. And then the relationship afterwards just falls apart. The Bible would much rather have you focus on building a strong relationship, even if the ceremony itself isn't as important, right? Because the ceremony is a really cool moment, but the relationship is what truly matters. And I think that's just really cool. So sometimes you can actually learn about relationships from the Bible just from what it doesn't say, right? So we can let our imaginations go wild and imagine what the ceremony was like, but ultimately it doesn't matter nearly as much as the principles we learn from the couple themselves, right? And so I just think that's worth highlighting. Is there any principles that you want to highlight just about this stuff before we actually jump into kind of the relationship between us and Christ stuff?
No, I had one for that, but not for just regular application.
Okay, cool. Well, in regards to the relationship with us and Christ, how about you just lead us off there?
Okay, well, I thought about this earlier, but I figured we were going to touch on it at the end. But whenever she's laying in bed at night and she's longing for her beloved to come back, we talked about this during our like in-person study with the high schoolers, and it's something that I think is really convicting, just because I think it would be really cool if we longed for Christ in the same way that she was longing for her beloved to come back, because in the same way that he went off to prepare a place, Christ said that he's off to prepare a place and he'll come back for us. And so the fact that it's night after night, she's sitting there, she's like, I'm longing for him. I want him to come back. I miss him. I want to be reunited with him. I think it is just a cool mind shift, a perspective change if we could long for Christ in the same way that she was longing for her beloved. And so that kind of parallels like the church and Christ and the relationship that they have. So,
Yeah. Well, and especially because it doesn't even really just have to wait for engagement, because if you just look at couples nowadays, or even single people nowadays, their yearning to be in a relationship is often so strong
Right.
that, and that's not necessarily inherently bad, right? I think
No,
God
'cause they
designed
have.
us to be in relationships. Yeah, they design, like, this is a healthy desire.
Yeah.
But I think it is convicting to think about the fact that I have seen so many couples, including Christian couples, right? Or even Christian single people, right? Or just church culture. Let me just talk about church culture, right? I have seen so many people in church culture who are constantly asking like single people, so when you gonna get a girlfriend? When you gonna get married? When you gonna do that?
Yeah.
What if our questions were like, so when are you gonna just give everything to Christ, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you yearn for a relationship with Christ as much as you yearn for a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Why isn't that you don't yearn to be as intimate and close with Christ as you do to give yourself to your spouse, right? Like, I think that's convicting, right? Because we see that this girl is yearning in that way. And I think the main reason why we can see a lot of parallels between this particular passage, between the man and the woman in our relationship with Christ, is because this is the state that we are currently in as a body of believers, right? We are betrothed to Christ, and we are awaiting that future day where the wedding supper of the Lamb will happen, right? That is the imagery that Jesus calls upon at the Last Supper, like you mentioned, when he says, I go to prepare a place for you. I'm going to come back for you. We have ate the bread. We have drank the wine. We have agreed to the bride price. We are betrothed to Jesus. And now we are in this state of waiting like the 10 virgins who need to keep our lamps lit, right? And we are supposed to be in the state of constant waiting. And you know what? We might be like this girl, right? Where we are in this state of waiting and we are wondering, why is it taking so long?
Yeah.
It's been 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Shouldn't seem like it should take that long to build a place. Where's he at? Has he forgotten us? Is he going to be true to his word? We're not worthy. Maybe he's decided to just stay away, right? And these things might be the very things that penetrate our own hearts. That thought that she's had, that nightmare that she has had, is the nightmare that oftentimes Christians might have in their moments of doubt. But here's the cool thing. One day, the good shepherd that we fell in love with in the Gospels, is going to come riding over the hills with columns of smoke. And he's not going to just be a shepherd.
Oh, no.
He is going to be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the greater Solomon, the greater son of David, who shows up surrounded by all of his mighty angels. And he's going to bring us to him to be his bride and to be his queen. Right? So whenever we see Jesus in the Gospels, we see the meek and mild, lowly Jesus, the carpenter from Nazareth. When we see him in Revelation, he ain't the same Jesus, right? We fell in love with the shepherd, but that shepherd is a king, right? And that is the big plot twist right here. And whenever he's coming back for us, it's going to be a much more amazing thing than we could have ever imagined, because we can read the theology of it in the Bible, but we're never going to fully understand it until we experience it. Because here's the cool thing. Whenever you look earlier in the song, the girl already referenced the guy with royal imagery, right?
Yes.
The king has invited me into his chambers. She already called him a king. He already treated her like a queen.
Yeah.
She just didn't realize he
The
was
literal-
actually a king,
Yeah.
right? In a way, we have come to realize Jesus is the king. He's the Messiah. The Messiah is the king. But we're not going to fully understand who he is until he starts rolling up like Solomon.
Yeah.
And we realize that Solomon is no longer the wisest man on earth, and he is no longer the richest man on earth. Jesus is. And when he shows up on his white stallion and he comes to bring us to him, then all of a sudden we will see our king crowned on the day of the gladness of his heart. And we will be able to rejoice. And we will be with him and he will be with us. And we will finally be able to consummate that beautiful relationship. We'll have the wedding supper of the Lamb. We will be with him forever. We will be with him. He will be with us. And so that's the beautiful parallel that we see in Song of Solomon chapter 3. The great plot twist of the Song of Songs is really the great plot twist of Revelation, right? And so it's just absolutely beautiful what we see going on here, what we see going on in the relationship with this couple, the principles that we can draw out. And I think that the more that you reflect on the parallels between this couple and our relationship with God, the more principles you'll be able to draw out, because you realize that we should react to our spouses and we should react in these relationships in a similar way to how we should handle our relationship with Christ, right? And so guys, we need to love as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit to your husbands, right? And so there's just some really beautiful stuff here. This video has already been way longer than all the other ones, significantly. And so do you have any other last comments? There's so much more we could talk about,
Yeah, there
but
really is.
what are some final comments you want to share before we wrap this up?
I'll say one quick thing, which kind of ties into what you were just saying. But if things in this book, like if you've been following like so far in the study, if things that you've read in this book like really excite you and you like this like relationship that they're having, just know that the relationship that's being told here between a man and a woman is like an earthly relationship, but you are given that opportunity to have that relationship like with Christ for eternity, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So like this is an earthly relationship that will pass away. This man and this woman will die. They can't live forever, but with a relationship with Christ that lasts forever, you can have that relationship with him for eternity. And so that's a word of encouragement.
Yeah,
I think.
we are the lowly vineyard workers who have no reason to expect our groom to return to us, but when he returns, we will realize that we were even less worthy of him than we thought.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's something to really celebrate in. So very good. All right, cool. Well, Brianne, thank you so much for joining me in this video. And we will be back next week to talk about some very intimate and probably uncomfortable things to talk about. But it'll be a very good time, and I hope that y'all are enjoying joining us on this journey. Until next time, this is Now Let's Be Honest. My name is David Tate.
And my name's Brianne.
And I hope y'all have a great day. Keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. And we will see y'all later. God bless. You read a verse, you sing a hymn, the money's in the plate. Sundays you mark out for him, but even then you show up late. You bought the shirt, you wear the cross, but sin throughout the week. For 30 shekels and a noose, you kiss him on the cheek.